wanted to talk about why anybody would vote for Trump. Because I think if people, normies, who don't follow politics a lot, and a lot of people outside of the United States who only just see the kind of summary news that we get about American political events, they just see what's presented. Things like a photo of Elon Musk jumping up in a Trump rally to make him look ridiculous. And weird things that Trump says, and this thing that's kind of being played up right now on Drudge Report. Harris reveals her medical records, shames Trump. What is he hiding? You know, this is a sort of let's see, which one of these did I want to go to? This is the sort of thing that only speaks to and is reaching out to the true blue supporters. Nobody who is a Trump person or maybe a Republican will say, "Oh, well, now that you mention this, this is the deciding factor. I'm going to vote for Harris." They wouldn't say that, And in fact, this article here I noted says this quote. You see, says Trump claims want to do things like no more cows. Now, the writer of this article understands the point Trump is trying to make, and I think Trump does, but Trump foolishly gives the media all these terrible sound bites, like they're eating the dogs, they're eating the cats. Some things are misinformation, some things are just foolishly said, but something like this, he's clearly referring to this climate change accusations, and I think a lot of this is misinformation, but if he wants to make this point, he should make it clearly, because otherwise he's giving the media, who is predisposed to oppose him, and he and his supporters would be the first to say that. He just gives them more and more of this ammunition. And it still begs the question, since the Brits are seeing this, when the day, if and when Trump is reelected, they're shocked. And I was in a board meeting the morning after the election when George W. Bush was reelected. And there were very smart European high-level guys on the board there, and they were stunned. They were like, "Well, the only articles that they read in the international press was that silly things about Trump. He's a goofball. He's mentally deficient. He's a war criminal. He's going to be hauled in front of the Hague for starting these terrible foreign wars." How would anybody vote for him? So this also begs the question from some of my foreign friends now, that they said, "Oh yeah, we saw a picture of Elon Musk jumping up and down at this rally." Well, I guess Trump's finished. No one's going to vote for him. But the reality is the election is really too close to call. And even in the very partisan media in the U.S. that's trying to kind of spin it that Harris has the edge, the reality is it's scarily close to call, too close to call again. So I wanted to look at some of the issues that people are really voting for. And first, we have to understand that Trump is not an unknown quantity. The media is saying, he's a threat to democracy and this and that and the other. But I think we've seen he's already been president, and he's so chaotic, I'm not even sure he can get something done, much less really be a threat to democracy. And if he started to have a lot of partisan prosecutions and this sort of thing, it would certainly turn the electorate against him, and it would be even more difficult to enact any kind of radical legislation that we're afraid of. So the idea to paint Trump, the media has to tell us how bad he is. We already heard all that before the 2016 election, and we experienced a Trump presidency that was so chaotic that a lot did not get done. So that's to begin with. Now, here's an issue we're barely scraping by. Gen Z says money matters in U.S. election. This is from the BBC. You typically don't see articles like this in the U.S. press that is trying to kind of tell you the opposite. The U.S. press tells you you're kind of mistaken if you think things are more expensive. Like Joe Biden said during his debate, things have never been better. But people do see their groceries tripling, quadrupling in price, and fast foods even more so. Now, this may be just one small sector, one silo of the economy. And maybe overall you could point to things like wage inflation and say that since that's getting better, you have more buying power to buy your groceries. So it's an illusion. You just think you're paying $4.99 for potato chips where you used to pay $1.99. But the reality is people do feel that the inflation from foodstuffs and fast food, no matter what some sort of overall economic picture can be spun out to be. So these are real issues that people are really feeling. So we still have articles like this. If you go back to some of my shows back to January of 2024, this year, there was a whole flurry of media articles, and I think maybe back into December of the previous year as well, where New York Times, CNN, they had these front page articles that were telling people, well, you're confused if you think things cost more because there are these other issues about wages are going up, they're inflated, and so it's just an illusion that you think you're paying more. And we still have some of these articles right here based on this idea that overall everyone's wages all taken into average are higher. That through a calculation means you have more buying power for groceries. Still, again, when foodstuffs have doubled or tripled in prices, this is a kind of a coping, as they say, or even a gaslighting to try to tell people that what they're seeing, they're not really seeing. I'm going to turn on this so I don't look so ghastly white. And in this article, they even say that consumers see prices, not inflation rates. That's a quote from the article. Of course they do, because they know the money in their pocket and what things used to cost, and what in the last 4 years of the Biden administration, how much things have risen. And, to have some economists or the media try to school you to say, well, based on these other overall inflation issues, you're just going to have to deal with the higher prices. It doesn't make much sense. And somewhere in this article, they do make the point that the foodstuffs is a trailing issue. So even if the macroeconomic picture is much better, or better than it's ever been, as Biden says, people are still hurting because that effect is a lagging indicator that will filter down eventually to foodstuffs. Supposedly, you trust them. And I think another issue, and this is not, I don't believe this has been mentioned in any of these articles in the media that's trying to kind of, as the young people say, sweep for the Democrats to try to tell people they're mistaken if they think they don't have enough money. The inflation we're experiencing now for a lot of Americans, unless you can remember all the way back to the 1970s, where you had, double-digit inflation and prices were rising all the time, then people could be comfortable and understand, well, everything's inflation, everything's going to go up. Beyond that, when you get into the 80s up to the present, we haven't seen inflation. Any of these other generations haven't seen any inflation like we have in the last 4 years in terms of everyday foodstuffs. Again, you can always point to some, GDP, CPI indicators, and technically, you can make the numbers and tell people, oh, those things aren't as high as they are. They've tripled in price, but that's just an illusion. People do realize things cost a lot more, and that's an issue. Now, why is this important? Because if the Democrats lean on this kind of argument, you risk overconfidence, the same kind of overconfidence that led to Hillary Clinton losing in 2016. And I have heard Harris a few times acknowledge the high prices, which is a fantastic thing to do and a divergence away from, again, the Joe Biden idea that everything is just fine, and to roll out these articles in the press saying everything is fine. But I also have to admit, I believe if you go back to the debate, and I've got a video of this when I was watching it, the first question and during the debate between Harris and Trump was about the high food costs, which are real, despite all of these articles, to Harris. And Harris just ignored that question and just talked about her background. And I did say at the time, and it's true, that's really what you should do in a debate. You've got to ignore the hard questions and just say whatever you want to say. And you shouldn't really debate in a debate. Trump debated in the debate and responded to Harris a lot. And it was kind of a not a successful performance for him because of it. So this is one issue. America has to deal with the high prices. And the Republicans have to be clear, and I don't think they have been. Trump is not a clear communicator in saying Americans, regular people, are barely scraping by, and the Democrats have to take this seriously. And I'll diverge to another point. Harris, the Democrats have been super successful in almost positioning Harris as an outsider or a new candidate away from Biden and diverging. It doesn't seem like she's an incumbent, and it doesn't seem like she's having to defend his positions and say everything's fine, but yet I want to make all these new changes. The way she was just brought in after the primaries were done and after the votes were counted for another person, I think it has worked to her advantage. Let's move on from this. This is an issue of kind of, I would say, asleep at the wheel. I'm really mostly a foreign policy wonk, and so that's what I've been interested in all the decades of my life, almost since I was a little kid. And I think anybody who's paying attention can see that specifically during the Biden administration. I'm not saying all Democrats. I thought, the Clinton administration was, all things considered, good on foreign policy. You can have some qualms about the Obama administration. You can have a lot of qualms about the George W. Bush administration in what they did. But the Biden administration has been asleep at the wheel. And we've seen, if you watch my other videos, I've harped on about this. We've seen the international order breakdown in the last 4 years, happened on Biden's watch. We have China openly threatening its neighbors. It's practically at war with the Philippines right now. It's made countries like Cambodia essentially a client state to it, a vassal state. We have Russia that invaded Ukraine. And when we have the whole situation where Iran was emboldened in the Middle East to attack Israel on all fronts. And we have, as an example of this trend, a country like Venezuela say, hey, wow, if the U.S. is not maintaining the world order anymore, maybe we should decide maybe to invade a neighbor and take over these oil fields. Maybe we should do that. There was no real historical reason or cultural connection to that area. It was just like, wow, if it's a free-for-all in the world, let's go over there. So here we have, see, when stuff like this happens in Israel, it's always kind of seen, and you can tell that the U.S. is in charge. Israel has acted on behalf of a lot of U.S. interests in bombing and handling things in the Middle East, so the U.S. doesn't have to directly. But in this case, again, asleep at the wheel, the Biden administration seems disconnected from what's happening in the Middle East, and they've let Israel and this government of Netanyahu destroy its own issue. It should have been in the catbird seat. It should have been able to have world opinion with it in that it was attacked. But since, and they're saying it, and I'm loath to say the word genocidal, but the way that they've attacked in Gaza, you know, it was way too much. And everybody knows, even if you could say, well, it's justified and we got to end this war, you know, you saw what the U.S. did in Iraq and Afghanistan. The world, the eyes of the public and the media are on the country that's going in, no matter under what auspices that they're going into another country. You got to be careful to not end up having a lot of little kids shot in the head with bullets, which we've had in Gaza. The fact, what's really surprising is not that maybe Israel reacted in this way or this government of Netanyahu reacted in this way. It's that the U.S. has allowed it to happen and has not controlled or moderated it. Now, this whole idea of foreign wars, as they say in the Bible, the wars and rumors of wars have erupted under this administration, along with hundreds of billions of dollars going overseas when the U.S. has $34 trillion worth of debt and is increasing $100 trillion in debt every 100 days or so. This has caused a lot of people to, again, look to the more isolationist view of Trump. I don't really agree with that. I would say that, you know, if the U.S. doesn't make and ensure that the world is the way it wants to be, we're going to end up with a world that is not good for the U.S., that is hostile to the U.S. And I think a lot of Americans listened to the media, the Democrat-leaning media, in the first 8 years of this century, when George W. Bush had those two elective foreign wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. And they were relentlessly told that war is bad, it's terrible, the president who does it should be hauled in front of the Hague as a war criminal, and we don't have the money to spend hundreds of billions of dollars for that. And I think by the end of the second Bush term, which the Bush administration was very terrible in being unable to explain what it was doing, why it was doing, its justification, and to somehow wrap it up very quickly. I think even a lot of Republicans ended up believing what the liberal media was saying. Yes, war is bad. We shouldn't have those terrible wars. So here we have a position where the U.S. is involved in a lot of foreign wars, but not being able to exert the influence to limit the deaths, the needless deaths, no doubt, that these wars have created. So this is another reason people would want to vote for Trump. You know, Trump has returned the Republican Party to its traditional isolationist pre-World War II roots. You know, since the end of World War II, the Republicans have been kind of internationalists, or the world's policemen, and getting involved in a lot of overseas wars, and Trump has changed that back. So we have the economy, we have overseas wars. I didn't prepare an article for it, but obviously the other one is immigration. The Biden administration had a very historically peculiar open borders in terms of illegal immigrants, not legal immigrants, but just people going over the borders, taking care of them very well, and then resettling them in various states in the United States. The Republicans should have been able to make a bigger issue of that, but by its own admission, the Biden administration's immigration policy failed. They had to completely reverse it and change to a Trumpian policy of closed borders. But then Trump opposed that, in making him look very cynical. So he kind of ceded some of the high ground to the Democrats on that issue. But still, there's a lot. Harris was supposed to be in charge of border issues, and I'm not sure what she did, if anything. But the immigration policy is another policy where many people would not believe that the Democrats have completely reversed their policy, and thus they would want to vote for Trump despite how chaotic Trump is. They believe he'll be better on the economy. They'll believe they want an isolationist foreign policy, and they want, I guess, just returning to normal border controls where you have, other countries don't allow everybody in, no questions asked, as the Biden administration did for a time. So these are reasons why people would still vote for Trump, even though the media showed you pictures of Elon Musk jumping in the air, looking like a fool. That people still vote for the issue. So, however, there have been these articles because the media can't get too far away from the reality of the polling. And despite kind of the spin we see in social media and Twitter and kind of even I get the feeling, when I'm presented the pictures of the quotes of Trump saying crazy things, sometimes taken way out of context, but Trump is not good at explaining anyway. So the media is not going to pick up the ball for him and say what he really means in some of these statements. So what I'm saying, I guess, is even I get the impression sometimes that Harris is way ahead, because why would anybody vote for Trump when we saw a picture of Elon Musk jumping on stage? And ha ha ha. Well, I just told you all the reasons. There are issues, and as the elections, the election is so close, the Democrats. These articles have come out. They can't ignore how close things are. People are nervous. They know the polls are tight, it says here. And if you're a Democrat, this is a very positive thing, because if we remember the 2016 elections with Hillary Clinton, a lot of that election was kind of media spin. For 6 months before the election date, the media was collectively patting itself on the back and patting the back of all Americans for electing the first woman president, and Trump was nothing but a joke. I think this time around they're treating him a little more seriously. They have to. And they really have to get away from articles like this that are trying to tell people that the issues that they care about are not really issues and they're mistaken. Yes, narrow paths, all tight paths. As I explained before, there's just a handful, 4 or 5 states that are in play. All the other states are going to go one way or another. All their electoral votes, they're already going into one camp or another. There's just a few battleground states that are at issue. So it remains extraordinarily tight. And finally, for those who see, for someone who's of a certain age, and when I look at the Democrat and the Republican parties, I see them a certain way. So when I look at the Republicans, I say they're internationalist party. They want to be the policeman of the world. They want to make sure that, if we have to send troops overseas to ensure things for the way we need them, that's the way we want it to be. And we have free trades in international organizations for various reasons, to not only just for competitiveness and freedom, but to create a middle class in a lot of other little countries through improving their economies through open trade, Trump's changed all that. You know, he's an isolationist. Um, he's put up trade barriers, and some of those are very justified. You know, the open trade has worked in a lot of smaller countries. In bigger countries like China, it's just enforced their authoritarian bent. But Trump was a sea change in U.S. policy, in not in Republican doctrine, and a lot of people will breathe a sigh of relief. Not the least of which are people within the Republican Party once Trump is gone, and he'll be gone if, most certainly, if he loses the election. And you know, a lot of people looked at the administration of Obama as like a continuation of the George W. Bush administration, because the people who implemented his economic policies were the same giant, connected to the same giant banks as the people who were in the Bush administration. And despite the media spending 8 years telling all of us that foreign wars were bad, Obama started his own completely elective war, probably even more elective than Iraq or Afghanistan, in Libya. And that area continues to be a seething cauldron of chaos today. You don't see a lot of media on that. Why is that? Media loved Obama. But what I'm trying to say is Trump was a difference. And before Trump, it did seem like to a lot of people, and this was some cynical people would tell you this about voting, that the Republicans and Democrats were really no different. Economic policy was all run and influenced by the big banking institutions, and ever since the Reagan administration, it's been the more foreign wars, the better. So if Trump goes away, there's a lot of interesting questions about what will happen to the Republican Party. Will people who are true Trump supporters, who believe in, you know, the high tariffs for trade and more isolationist foreign policy, will they go back to the Republican Party establishment who believes the exact opposite of those things? Would there even be a case to make another third party? But I mean, if the Republican Party splits, that would probably mean the Democrats would even be that much stronger or monolithic. But this is the final big question of the election. But again, we would be foolish to say that Harris is a shoo-in. Still too close to call. A lot of variables. Despite, and I'll say this again, despite the pictures the media tell you of how, of Elon Musk jumping foolishly, it's still too close to call. So that's, I hope it wasn't too rambling, but that was trying to explain to people who have mainly only seen the bland media descriptions of Trump and what he says in his rallies, to try to understand why people would still vote for someone like that. And there are reasons. So that's it. Please like and subscribe. I get very few views on my videos, but I think I'm somewhat interesting. I have some perspective, and it's good, I think, to watch. And let's put things in context, because we are in an era of polarization with a lot of crazy media that is so partisan on one side or another. So anyway, see you next time. Bye-bye.